Right, Biggs, second video of our Go.Compare Biggar Thinking Lions edition series today, and we're talking halfbacks.
I don't know what you think, Rob, but I look at the two teams and I think, right, Australia clearly aren't as strong as the Lions, right? But there's areas in that side where you think, okay, they're not a million miles apart. You look at, say, the centres in Ikitau and Swahili, both brilliant players against whether it's Tuipulotu, Jones, Ringrose, Aki. And you think, right, there's not a huge amount of difference there. You think, right, okay, front row, Genge and Furlong, let's just take those two against Tupou and Angus Bell. I think, again, not a huge amount of difference. Valentini at 8 against Conan, sort of Skelton against Itoje. You know, these types of things, that, like, you're just thinking there's not a million miles apart from everywhere. Yes, the Lions have the edge, but then you look at 9 and 10, and I just think when you compare the two sets of halfbacks, I just think that's where the biggest gulf in class between the two teams are. You look at, let's say, it's very likely come Brisbane, the first test, Gibson Park and Russell will be in those shirts. Who are they going up against? And it's probably going to be Ben Donaldson, Jake Gordon, to Tate McDermott. And you just think, without being disrespectful to those two players, they're probably in a category below Gibson Park and Russell, aren't they? In terms of experience, in terms of winning things, in terms of the experience of playing in big test matches internationally. And I just think that, yeah, like I said, I don't know, is that fair to say, Rob, that the biggest difference between the two teams is in those positions?
Yeah, I definitely think so. You know, with the Lions 9 and 10, you could say world class. You could be in a conversation for a world 15.
I think you look at those two players, and I think that's why Andy Farrell has made such a point of trying to get those two some minutes together, because you look at where, obviously Finn Russell backing up that Perth game before the Reds game, it was obviously, it felt like a really important decision for those two to get some minutes under their belt. And yes, they haven't had loads and loads of time, but that's the nature of the beast on a Lions tour. You don't get loads of time in the saddle. I just think the two of them really complement each other quite well. I think it's fascinating because I actually spoke to Gibson Park this week, and I asked him the question about how different is it playing with Finn Russell compared to Johnny Sexton, who he's played with for the last couple of years, in terms of a really dominating character. And his answer was surprising, actually, because he actually said, well, Finn's actually very similar to Johnny in demanding for the ball and having that real game management side of it. And I think that's probably something that over the last 2 or 3 years, you can't label at Finn Russell anymore. I think previously there was no doubt about it. There was an element of you'd get some brilliant moments with Finn, but you'd get some horror moments as well, wouldn't you? And it just wasn't probably consistent enough at international level to get the job done. But you look over the last couple of years, and he's still producing those highlight moments and those brilliant moments of skills. But he's also not making that many errors and just really going about his business almost quite un-Finn Russell, like, in a sense. Does that make sense? I think he's just playing really smart, intelligent rugby, not taking as many risks, but still producing those high X-factor moments. And I think you put somebody like a Gibson Park next to him, and one of Jameson Gibson Park's biggest strengths is his ability to take pressure off his 10. And what I mean by that is his ability to just dominate the ball for 2 or 3 phases to allow, and a really good example of this is the try that Dan Sheehan scored from the crossfield kick against the Western Force game, where Gibson Park, first of all, takes a short side, then he plays the forward pod in. All the time, Finn Russell's not looking at what play is going on. He's just looking at scanning at what's on the far side, how short are the Force defence, who's on the touchline, can he find the kick, can he find space? It allows Finn Russell to look for those big passes, those lovely little chips or crossfield kicks, give him more time on the ball, and rather than potentially having the ball in his hands all the time. Whereas if you've got the ball in your hand all the time, there's more chance. Yes, there's more chance of you doing something good, but there's also more chance of you taking a few more risks or throwing a few more riskier passes or forcing an issue. And I think that's what he's been brilliant for.
I was wondering, Biggs, on obviously Andy Farrell's the coach now. You were never on a Lions tour with Andy Farrell as head coach, and obviously Gats was there for all of your tours. How do they manage the partnerships in training? Are you always working with the same 9? Is it like you said, about putting the bibs out and you're looking, are the other lads looking around saying, right, which team is Gibson Park and Finn on, because that's going to be the test team? How do they manage, training together?
It's a bit different when you're on a Lions tour, because I do generally think the first couple of games where you are moving around so often, it's really difficult to really form partnerships because, like you said, everyone's coming in at different stages through clubs and, whether they get to a final, semi-final, etc. But you start to see, okay, well, this guy's played a couple of games with this back combination of a back row, or Finn and Jameson Gibson Park will probably be paired up as much as possible because I think they've made a decision early doors that those two were the pairings. I have to say, I think the Lions have done a really good job of those two positions in 9 and 10, just building that slowly as a partnership and allowing them to find out about each other's games a little bit. Because it's all well and good. I played with Conor Murray back in 21 in the opening game against Japan before we set off for South Africa. And, I've watched Conor Murray's games 100 times. I've played against him, seen it on telly, seen it live, etc. But until you're actually on the pitch with him, you sort of know, okay, well, he likes to box kick from this position or he likes to take a step from this side. And until you're actually playing in a competitive fixture, you don't really know those ins and outs as much as you can sit around a laptop or a training pitch, etc. So I think the Lions have been really smart and they've stolen a bit of a march really on the Aussies in terms of being able to just form that partnership without anybody really sort of second guessing it. If we sort of just take those two as the prime examples at the minute, and you kind of know what Gibson Park's going to do. And for me, people may say, oh, that's easy to defend, or that's a positive, that's a negative. But for me, that's such a positive from a 10. So I know that if the ball is slow, I know that Jameson Gibson Park's probably going to take a short side. He's probably going to set up, control the forwards to put some aerial pressure on from his kicking game. If the ball is quick, he's probably going to get the ball up in the 10's hands, in the second receiver's hands, whatever it is, nice and quickly. And as a 10, there's nothing better than knowing that your 9 is just going to give you the ball when it's quick and take control maybe when the pressure's on a little bit to allow you to assess your time. And I think that then gives Finn Russell a little bit more time to have a look. Some of the clips against the Force were really good in terms of some attacking kicks because all he's doing is scanning. Because he knows that Gibson Parks, as soon as he's at the base of the ruck, the balls are going to be in his hands. So I think that's what they've complemented each other really well because Finn Russell clearly still likes to have a little bit of that X factor in his game, the chips, the crossfields, the long passes, etc. But he's kind of got someone inside him who is just going to give him the ball when he wants it, take the pressure off him when he needs it, and not put too much pressure on his kicking game as well. And if you look at the other players who are, you've probably got a little bit different in terms of, let's look at, say, Alex Mitchell, who's, going to be a much more of an attacking threat than Jameson Gibson Park. Rightly or wrongly, you probably don't know quite as much what Mitchell's going to do. And then you've got sort of Marcus Smith in a 10, 15 slash position, but he's very much a guy who loves the game when it's open, when it's loose, and almost loves the unpredictability of it. Finn Smith is more of a structure player. And then obviously Owen Farrell coming in probably gives that experience of playing a little bit more direct if things are needed, if Australia get on top of things, and if they potentially lose the first test or it's a really close first test, they think, okay, well, do we need someone who's really going to take control of this game and play percentages? And I know people sometimes will be like, oh, that's a boring way to play, et cetera, et cetera. But that's generally, you look at Jameson Gibson Park's game over the last 2 years. How often has he really taken that many risks? If you looked at every single one of his decisions over the last 2 years, I'd say 15% of the decisions he makes are like, oh, I'm not sure that was the right option or that was a bit risky. Do you know what I mean? And I think from a 9 complementing a 10 like Finn Russell, it's just absolutely perfect, knowing what Finn's got in reserve on the bench and other players around him.
Do you think Owen Farrell joining up with the squad puts a bit of a spanner in the works in terms of this partnership pairing between Jameson Gibson Park and Finn Russell?
No, I don't. I don't think he's there for that reason. There's no doubt that Finn Russell is the out-and-out best 10 over the last couple of years in Britain and Ireland. I don't think Owen is in the squad to break that up. I think he's there almost a little bit as like someone to lead the group during the week as well, maybe a little bit, and have that real experience. Should he fall back on it? Should one of those guys get injured? You are still, a lot of the rest of the players who are there then are quite inexperienced in that position in terms of big test matches. So I think he's there for that experience, rightly or wrongly. I don't think his presence is there to do anything other than that. I think 9 and 10 is are probably the safest positions in the squad at the minute. Well, I think Finn's personality as well is not like, his personality and his sort of attitude to life and rugby is kind of like he's not going to be overly bothered in that sense anyway. He's going to play his game.
Are there any areas to the Wallabies, maybe weaknesses, that you think the Lions will particularly target in attack?
I think they'll look to, Joseph Swahili is an incredible talent, and I think they'll look to flood a lot of you see the way the Lions have played on this tour. They've looked to move the ball to those outside channels, haven't they? Especially our first phase. And I think they'll look to try and isolate him as much as possible, want him to come forward and be aggressive in defence and just get a little, whether it's a wide pass from Russell and then a nice little short pass from a Freeman, a Tuipulotu, whatever it is. I think they'll look to try and invite him to be aggressive. But I think the biggest thing for me, for anyone who watched the Wallabies game against Fiji on last week, Fiji took them on at the power game. But I just think that will be the one. You look at when Fiji had success, they were dynamic, they were brutal in the contact area, they were brutal with their carries, footwork, pace. And I think that's what this Lions team has got. And you look at the prime example of that probably is someone like in the backs, let's go Tommy Freeman. Just looks so fit, so strong, doesn't he? Like a battering ram, pace. And then your guys like Ben Earl, Jack Morgan in terms of, how good has Jack Morgan been, by the way, on this tour? Just ridiculous. So you think like those types of players are going to get them on the front foot. And that's another point probably to make, Rob, is that we mentioned we compared and contrasted the Australia halfbacks and the Lions halfback pairings. Halfback's a lot easier to play when you go on the front foot going forward, and you'd expect Gibson Park and Finn Russell to have a little bit more of that side of the ball. You'd expect them to be, with the pack and the power they've got there, you'd expect them to sort of be in control of that a little bit more. Whereas a McDermott or a Gordon or a Donaldson, yes, the gulf in class between the two players is there to see, but the gulf could even be exaggerated by the quality ball that they get in terms of from the Lions offensively and defensively. So I think that's probably, yes, you compare the two halfbacks and you think, right, the gulf is there clearly. Yes, they're better players than the Australian halfbacks, no doubt. But it's like, okay, can you get on the front foot? And if you get on the front foot, and same goes for Gordon and McDermott, because McDermott, what one of his strengths is around that ruck when they do get good front football. You saw the try that I think it was Wilson scored against England in the autumn, where they just got on the front foot. He's picked and gone when the ball's been quick and dynamic, offload, score. So that's something that the Lions will have to be aware of. Can they slow Australia's ball down? Because, and I think if you watch that game against, especially the two games that Australia played, Wales and England in the autumn, both teams couldn't slow that ball down. And then all of a sudden, McDermott and Gordon and Loaseo looked really good players. I'm not saying they looked Gibson Park or Finn Russell standards, but they looked really good players. Conversely, when they played Ireland did a really good job of slowing that ball down in the last week of the autumn, and naturally, as 9s and 10s, it becomes a bit trickier. So I think that emphasises the point as well about the halfback pairings, and I think 9 and 10 for the Lions are probably better as well at being able to get themselves through those stickier moments if they're under a bit of caution as well.
Are you seeing any particular themes or shapes developing in how the Lions are looking to attack? The
Lions are looking to get the ball to edges quite a lot. They're playing some. I actually think their shape is really nice. They're playing a lot off. They're playing a lot off 9 and then 10. So not that often are they going off 9, which tends to sort of slow line speed down. When you play off 9, it's very difficult for teams to come forward on you. So it takes out the line speed from the opposition, but it means that your forwards have to do well to win the collisions. So then if you don't win the collisions, you're in a bit of trouble. But going back to what we said about Gibson Park, if the ball isn't quick off that first ruck when he plays that first pod in, he's coming straight back to your short side, you can guarantee it. He's not wasting energy by going the same way and inviting pressure from the blitz. And I thought the Waratahs actually did that really well last week. But what they're doing from that sort of, they're looking to try and get the ball to the wide channels. So whether it's they're almost playing that pod of forward in off 10, when they play off 9 and then play off 10, they've got so many connections out the back. So you look at it, it's like I said, it's very Irish focused in terms of their game plan, but they've got their centres or their wingers attached out the back all the time, and they're looking to sort of play quite a lot of balls out the back as well. I think that's what Andy Farrell's comments will be regarding. They probably just need to win a few more collisions front door first, because when they do that, when they do win 2 or 3 collisions front door and playing through teams, that's when they look really good. That's when they get in behind and offload, etc. But I think that's where they've been really good. They've played a lot off 9, and in particular, when you do play Finn Russell, you tend to want to get the ball in his hands so he can. His variety in his passing game is exceptional. Probably the best 10 in the world in terms of the variety of his passing game. So I think you want the ball in his hands rather than having 9 dominate all the time. But like I said, when you lose that first 1 or 2 contacts and the speed of ball is slow, what Gibson Park will keep the ball out of Finn Russell's hands for another phase or 2, so that he can allow Finn to make better positions and better decisions when the ball is quicker.
Right, mate, talk to me about the Aussies then, because I don't know loads about them. I feel like this isn't like a generational Wallabies side. Like, I feel like they don't necessarily have a nailed down 9 and 10.
Especially since Noah Lolosio been ruled out of the test matches after that injury against Fiji.
So if we just talk about 10 for a minute, it's Ben Donaldson and Liner as well for the Reds, who I don't think will get too much of a look in the test team. But what he is just briefly touching on him, he's a brilliant goal kicker, up around 90% in Super Rugby this year. And then Donaldson is a little bit more of an attacking threat in terms of quite pacey, likes to challenge the line, likes to get the ball through his hands. Again, played in the Force team who haven't been great, so I think that doesn't help either. When you're a 9 and 10 and you're coming off the back of a team which have had a disappointing year, you always feel as a 9 and 10 that rests on you a little bit. You know what I mean? And then you look at the other 9s, and I think it's probably between Tate McDermott and Jake Gordon. Very different players. Tate McDermott's gonna challenge the line as much as possible. Look to catch the guard out at the breakdown, quick, snipey, going to challenge you in that area, whereas Jake Gordon's a bit more of your traditional line, ball up and away, good support line, scored a lot of tries for the Waratahs, only behind Israel Folau, I think, in terms of try scoring charts. So I think they're 2 very different. And then you've got a bit of an experience in Nick White in terms of if you need someone to come on maybe with 15, 20 to go and just control proceedings, play in the right areas, kick well, control things nice from half back there. So, like I said, you look at the quality options that you've got, and you look at what the Lions are able to bring in terms of a 100 cap, 3-time tourist Owen Farrell, just to not to sit on the bench or be in reserve, but almost as a safety net. Then that clearly shows probably where the difference between the 2 halfbacks pairings are at in terms of Australia and the Lions.
How do you think the Wallabies are going to look to play this series? Because they haven't had, it's not really ideal prep, is it? You know, like 1 game against Fiji. Obviously, they went quite well in the autumn, but I feel like they're a real unknown quantity about this Wallabies side.
Yeah, I mean, they were really poor against Fiji, weren't they? And I think it's important to say, Rob, look, the Lions are playing a team who are ranked 8th in the world. And you're not ranked 8th in the world for no reason. It's because you're not consistent and you've been up and down and you're going through a little bit of a transition period. So I think it's important to say that they're not playing a South Africa or New Zealand. And also what those 2 teams have in New Zealand and South Africa is a real identity. You know exactly how both teams are playing. Whereas this team, you're not really sure. Like, they've got some absolute brilliant players. You look at, it's almost like they're littered with brilliant players, aren't they? With Ikitau, Tom Wright, Swahili, Valentini, Angus Bell, Tupou, these guys, Skelton. And you just think, well, how are they 8th in the world with that group of players? And I think, like you said, it's, probably not having I look back and I think, right, so if you look at that 2013 Wallabies team from the test series, they also had a huge amount of weapons in terms of Ashley Cooper, Folau, these guys. But what they had is at 9 and 10, they had sort of world-class players who've been there, done it, worn the T-shirt in Curtly Beale, in Will Genia, in James O'Connor. And yes, they're probably still not quite at, maybe a Gibson Park or Finn Russell standards when you're comparing them. But, probably guys who've been there, worn the T-shirt in big matches previously. So I think that's probably where they're a little bit short in that area. I suppose that elite level in terms of halfbacks, and I think that's what the Lions have got. And I think probably the Aussies are just a level below, really good players, but probably not quite to that level. And how are they going to play it, Rob? I honestly don't know. I think they have to be smart. And Joe Schmidt, one thing Joe Schmidt will be really clever in terms of the players. You look at when they played Wales, when they played England in the autumn, they had sort of like 2 or 3 phases where they got their best players, those players that we've just mentioned, we've reeled off. There'll be plays designed around getting them on the ball. I really think that that's how they'll play. That's how they'll challenge the Lions, because I can't see if they go sort of traditional against traditional, it's very difficult to see how Australia can win this test series. But if they mix the game up, change the picture as often as they can, and I think they have to have set piece parity. You look at the Lions, you look at what they can bring off the bench as well. I think they need to have set piece parity to be able to stay in this game and stay in this test series. But, clearly the Lions are strong favourites, and rightly so. But one thing Joe Schmidt is a brilliant coach.
Right, mate, so your Go.Compare Key Decision this week. Which are maybe areas of weakness that the Aussies will target in the Lions camp, or maybe how they're going to negate that Russell and James Gibson Park combination?
So my Go.Compare Key Decision this week, and it is kind of a little bit the Waratahs. I can thank the Waratahs for this, actually, because I thought they showed a really good example and a really good blueprint for the Aussies and other teams, and the Brumbies and the Invitational team, etc. They showed a really good blueprint how to negate the Lions. Now, I'm not saying they offered a huge amount going forward, and you never felt for any minute that the Lions were going to lose the game. But what they did was they kept the Lions in between the 15s. And I think you look at the amount of handling errors that the Lions are making on tour, and a lot of those handling errors are right at the line. They're playing right at the line, the Lions, in between the 15-metre lines, and they're almost getting like hit man and ball, or the ball is right at the line, and if the pass is just a little bit behind the player, a little bit low, a little bit high, they're getting whacked, and all of a sudden then they're on the back foot, turnover, breakdown penalty. And I think that's the big thing. I think they will target the breakdown. They'll pick as many jacklers in the team as they can to go hard at the breakdown to disrupt the Lions' play, because the Lions' shape is really nice. I've been really impressed with it. So my Go.Compare Key Decision making process this week will be, can the Wallabies bring as much line speed as possible to force as many errors out of the Lions and go hard at the breakdown to stop Gibson Park and Russell having flow to their game and having the ball in their hands all the time and dictating play on the front foot, etc. If they get down the 15-metre channel and they have speed of ball, Australia are in trouble. If they can keep the Lions in between the 15-metre mark in the middle of the pitch and force as many errors and turnovers and make Gibson Park and Finn Russell put as much pressure on them as possible, but not individually put it on them. Put it on the team, which then may force your 9 and 10 to maybe take the odd risk or the odd poor decision, which, to be fair, they haven't made many since they've been on tour. But I think that's the key play for Australia against the Lions in this series.
Well, big thanks to Go.Compare for sponsoring today's video. If you like this content, click subscribe, because we'll be back every week with more content just like this. So cheers, Biggs.
Cheers, Rob. Big thanks again to Go.Compare, and we'll see you on the next one.